I used to think the most dangerous moment in a relationship was the fight you don't see coming. I was wrong. The most dangerous moment is the celebration you believe is safe, the moment you finally exhale, the moment you let your guard down because you think you've already earned your happy ending. The night Carson proposed, I was wearing a pale blue dress I bought on clearance because I'd convinced myself the universe didn't owe me anything expensive. We were at a small rooftop bar in Austin with string lights that made everyone's skin look softer than it really was. I remember the air felt warm and sweet, like it had been saving itself for me. Carson's hands were slightly shaky when he reached across the table. I didn't notice at first because he'd been nervous all evening, pretending it was just work stress, pretending he wasn't about to change my life. When he pulled the ring box out, my whole body went weightless, like my bones turned to feathers. I said yes so fast I didn't even let him finish his sentence. I didn't need the words. I needed the truth. And there it was, shining in a small velvet box, bright enough to make me forget every disappointment I'd ever swallowed. I remember laughing, crying, covering my mouth, and looking around because I wanted witnesses. I wanted the world to confirm that this was real, that I wasn't dreaming some desperate dream I'd have to wake up from alone. And then I looked at my best friend, Hannah. Hannah had been my person since we were 19, and broke and convinced heartbreak was a personality trait. She was the one who held my hair when I got sick at parties, the one who sat next to me when my dad stopped calling for months, the one who told me I wasn't too much when I started to feel like I came with an instruction manual nobody wanted to read. She knew every version of me, even the ugly ones. Especially the ugly ones. That's why, when my eyes found hers in the crowd Carson had gathered, I expected her to be the loudest. I expected her to be jumping, screaming, making a scene, because that's what best friends do. I expected her face to look like mine felt. But Hannah's smile landed wrong. It was quick. Too quick. Like it had been practiced. Like it was something she put on the way you put on mascara before you walk out the door. Not because you're excited, but because you're supposed to look like you are. Her eyes weren't shining. Her eyes were calculating. I told myself it was shock. I told myself she was overwhelmed. I told myself 1,000 gentle lies, because I didn't want a shadow in the first picture of my forever. She hugged me hard enough to make my ribs ache, and for a second I almost believed it. Almost. But then she leaned back, still gripping my arms, and her gaze dropped to the ring with this tiny flicker I couldn't name. It wasn't admiration. It wasn't even envy, not the obvious kind. It was something colder. Something that felt like a door closing quietly in another room. She said all the right things. She called me lucky. She called Carson perfect. She told me she'd known it would happen, like she'd been holding this secret hope in her pocket the whole time. Her words were bright, her voice sweet, but her energy was sharp, like broken glass wrapped in tissue paper. Back then, I didn't understand how someone can be close enough to know your heartbeat and still root for your collapse. The next morning, I woke up with my left hand floating above the blanket like it belonged to a different person. The ring was still there, still real, still catching the light. Carson was asleep beside me, mouth slightly open, arm thrown across my waist like he was trying to keep me from slipping away. I watched him and felt that deep, aching tenderness that makes you want to be better than you've ever been. I wanted to protect him from life. I wanted to protect our future from anything that could stain it. I didn't realize the stain was already on the fabric. My phone was a graveyard of notifications. Family congratulations. Coworker exclamation points. Old friends suddenly remembering my existence. Hannah had posted a photo of us with the caption, "Best day ever," and hundreds of people liked it, including people who hadn't spoken to her in years. She looked gorgeous in the picture, of course. Hannah always looked like she belonged in whatever room she walked into. In the photo, her arm was around my shoulder, her cheek pressed to mine, her smile wide. But when I zoomed in, I saw it again. That same thing. The smile was big, but her eyes were flat, like the joy stopped at the surface. Planning started the way it always does, with lists and sparkling ideas and that intoxicating belief that love makes everything easier. I picked a date. Carson called his mom. I stared at venue photos like they were portals to a better life. And Hannah inserted herself into every detail like she had a key to my happiness. She insisted we celebrate again, just us, because she said she wanted to soak it in. She suggested champagne and a fancy brunch spot downtown. She offered to help me choose a dress, help me build my guest list, help me pick flowers. She kept calling herself my maid of honor before I even asked, laughing like it was a joke, but not really waiting for my answer. I told myself it was devotion. I told myself she was excited. I told myself I was lucky to have a friend who cared that much. But every time I said the word wedding, something in her shifted. It was subtle, almost invisible, a stiffening of her shoulders, a brief pause before she responded, a tiny sigh that she tried to disguise as a laugh. If I mentioned Carson doing something sweet, she'd tilt her head and say things like, "He really knows how to make you feel special," like it was an observation about a magic trick, not a man's love. If I talked about the future, she'd smile and say, "You deserve this," but her voice would carry an edge that made it feel like a warning. And then the first crack turned into something I couldn't ignore. 3 weeks after the proposal, I walked into a coffee shop to meet Hannah, and the barista hesitated when he saw me. Not in a flirtatious way, not in a shy way, in a way that made my stomach drop before I even knew why. He looked at me like I was the last person to find out something everyone else already knew. Then she reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, flipping it over slowly like she was revealing a weapon. Her eyes stayed on mine. Her smile vanished completely. She told me there was something I needed to see. And before she even turned the screen toward me, before the truth could fully take shape, my phone buzzed in my lap with a new notification. One message. From someone I didn't expect. The preview was only a few words, but it hit me like a punch to the chest, because it mentioned Carson, and it mentioned Hannah, and it ended with a sentence that made my blood run cold. I stared at the screen, unable to breathe, as Hannah's hand hovered between us with her own phone, ready to finish what my notification had just started. I didn't know yet who was ruining my engagement. I only knew it had already begun. The first real betrayal didn't arrive loudly. It didn't explode my world or knock the air out of my lungs all at once. It crept in quietly, disguised as concern, wrapped in the familiar voice of someone who had loved me longest. That's what made it dangerous. That's what made it work. It started with questions. Hannah began asking about Carson in ways that felt almost thoughtful at first. She wanted to know how stressed he was at work, how often we argued, whether he'd ever talked about marriage before me. I told myself she was just being protective, just making sure I wasn't rushing into something because happiness had finally chosen me. I answered her honestly, the way you do when you believe the person listening is on your side. But her questions didn't end with curiosity. They ended with doubt. She'd pause after I answered, tilt her head slightly, and say things like she didn't realize he'd been engaged before, or that long hours at work could change people, or that sometimes men propose when they're afraid of being alone, not because they're ready. She never accused him directly. She didn't have to. She planted seeds, and let my imagination do the rest. I felt it the first time I looked at my ring and didn't feel joy, just a flicker of uncertainty, a question I hadn't asked before. Then she took it a step further. Later that evening, Carson admitted something else. He told me Hannah had messaged him earlier that week, asking if he was nervous about the engagement, if he felt ready, if he'd ever felt like he was settling. He said he thought it was strange but assumed she was just being supportive in her own way. He showed me the messages. They were framed as concern, but the undertone was unmistakable once I saw it from the outside. She was testing him. And when he didn't fail, she changed tactics. The next betrayal was public. Hannah started telling people she was worried about me. Mutual friends, co-workers, I barely knew. Even one of my cousins reached out asking if everything was okay. They all said the same thing. Hannah had mentioned she thought I was rushing into the engagement, that she was scared I was ignoring red flags because I wanted marriage so badly, that she loved me, but she didn't want to see me get hurt. By the time the words reached me, they'd grown teeth. I felt humiliated, exposed, like my private happiness had been turned into a group discussion I never agreed to attend. I called Hannah and asked her why she was saying these things. She didn't deny it. She told me she was just being honest, just protecting me, just doing what a real best friend would do. She said if everything was solid, my engagement could handle a little scrutiny. That sentence stayed with me. Handle a little scrutiny. As if my love was on trial. As if Carson and I were suspects instead of people building a future. The worst part was how convincing she sounded. Not frantic. Not jealous. Calm. Reasonable. Like someone who only wanted the truth. She cried while telling me she'd never forgive herself if she stayed quiet and something went wrong later. She said she hoped she was wrong. She said she prayed I'd laugh about this someday. I wanted to believe her. I needed to believe her. Because the alternative meant accepting that the person who knew my weaknesses best was using them against me. The final piece of the first betrayal landed when I found out she'd been meeting Carson without telling me. It wasn't romantic. Not openly. Not yet. It was framed as friendly check-ins. Coffee meetings she described as making sure he was treating me right. Carson hadn't told me at first because he didn't want to upset me. When he finally did, it was because Hannah had told him I already knew, that I'd encouraged it, that I trusted her completely. I hadn't. That realization broke something inside me. Not all at once. Just enough to let fear seep in. I pictured them sitting across from each other, her asking questions, her shaping narratives, her presenting herself as the reasonable one, while subtly painting me as emotional, insecure, difficult. I pictured her offering sympathy where she should have offered distance. I pictured her slowly stepping into a space that belonged to me. And still, I didn't confront her fully. I didn't draw a line. I told myself I was overreacting. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself I couldn't lose my best friend and my fiancé at the same time. That was her real betrayal. Not the lies themselves, but the way she made me doubt my own instincts. The way she rewrote reality so smoothly, I questioned whether my pain was valid. The way she stood close enough to touch my ring while quietly loosening it from my finger. By the end of that month, my engagement felt fragile. Carson and I were still together, still trying, still loving each other, but something sacred had been interrupted. A third voice had entered our relationship, whispering just loud enough to be heard. I didn't know yet that Hannah wasn't just testing my engagement. She was preparing to destroy it, and I had no idea how far she was willing to go next. The moment Hannah realized she couldn't quietly dismantle my engagement anymore, she changed strategies. What she couldn't break in private, she decided to poison in public. And once she did that, there was no undoing the damage. It began with whispers that suddenly had an audience. I noticed it at first in the way conversations stopped when I walked into a room. Friends who used to greet me with excitement now hesitated, their smiles unsure, their questions strangely careful. They'd ask how I was doing instead of congratulating me. They'd mention Carson's name like it was something fragile. I could feel something had shifted, like my happiness had become controversial. At a small get-together hosted by one of our mutual friends, someone pulled me aside and asked, gently, if I was sure I was okay. The tone wasn't curiosity. It was concern, already informed. When I pressed, she admitted Hannah had been worried about me. That Hannah felt I was under a lot of pressure. That Hannah thought I was ignoring signs that Carson might not be as committed as he appeared. I felt my face burn. Not because the accusations were true, but because they weren't mine to defend. My relationship had been dragged into rooms I wasn't in, judged by people who only knew a version of me Hannah had carefully curated. I realized then that she hadn't just shared her concerns. She'd framed a narrative, and she was very good at it. Hannah knew how to cry without looking unstable. She knew how to sound reasonable while implying something darker. She never said Carson was unfaithful. She said she worried about his patterns. She never said I was naive. She said I was hopeful to a fault. She never said she wanted us to fail. She said she was scared I would get hurt. By the time the story reached me, it had evolved into something ugly. People were questioning whether the engagement was rushed, whether Carson had proposed to fix something broken, whether I was ignoring red flags because I wanted a ring more than a reality. Every word felt like a judgment on my character, not just my relationship. The humiliation hit hardest when it went online. Hannah posted a long, emotional message late one night about loving someone so much you're willing to be the villain for their own good. She didn't name me. She didn't name Carson. She didn't have to. Everyone knew. She talked about watching someone you care about walk into a situation you can't stop. She talked about the burden of silence. She talked about being honest, even when it costs you friendships. Carson was furious in a quiet, controlled way I'd never seen before. He wanted to confront her, wanted to demand she take it down, wanted to draw a hard line. But I stopped him. Part of me still hoped this could be fixed. Part of me still believed Hannah wouldn't go all the way. I was wrong. She escalated again when she reached out to Carson's family. His sister messaged him asking if everything was okay between us. His mother called, voice tight with worry, asking whether he was sure about the timing of the wedding. They'd heard things. They didn't want to get involved, but they felt uneasy. Hannah had framed herself as the concerned friend who just wanted everyone protected. That was the moment I felt something inside me harden. This wasn't about me anymore. This wasn't about love or concern or fear. This was control. This was punishment. This was Hannah deciding that if she couldn't stand beside me in my happiness, she would make sure I didn't get to enjoy it freely. Our engagement stopped feeling celebratory. It became something we had to defend. Every plan felt heavy. Every conversation felt like damage control. Carson and I started arguing, not because we didn't love each other, but because we were exhausted, because we were always explaining, because we were always recovering from something Hannah had said or implied or posted. The public damage worked exactly the way she intended. Friends chose sides without announcing it. Invitations to group events slowed. Conversations felt tense. I could sense people wondering if they should support us or wait to see how it ended. Hannah had created doubt so effectively that even my joy felt inappropriate. The final escalation came when she cornered me at a friend's birthday dinner. Because once the damage is public, the lies have to multiply to survive. Once someone goes that far, they get sloppy. They get bold. They assume you're too overwhelmed to fight back. Hannah believed I was cornered. She believed I would stay silent to protect what little peace I had left. She believed I was afraid to lose more than I already had. She didn't know I was watching. She didn't know I was collecting every message, every screenshot, every inconsistency. She didn't know that while she was telling her version of the story to everyone else, the truth was quietly arranging itself in my hands. And she definitely didn't know that one message was already sitting in my phone, waiting for the exact right moment to be sent. The moment she thought she'd won. The collapse didn't happen all at once. It happened the way buildings fall in slow motion, after the damage has already been done deep inside the walls. By the time the outside cracks appear, it's already too late to save the structure. That's where my engagement was by the time Hannah decided to push one last time. Carson and I were barely sleeping. Every conversation felt heavy, like it carried the weight of defending our love instead of living in it. We kept saying we were fine, but we both knew we were surviving, not celebrating. Our engagement had turned into a constant state of recovery, and Hannah was the unseen hand behind every bruise. The breaking point came the night Carson didn't come home on time. He texted me earlier saying he was staying late at work. That alone wouldn't have bothered me before. But nothing existed in a vacuum anymore. Every delay felt loaded. Every unanswered call felt like proof of something I didn't want to believe. I sat on the couch, staring at my phone, trying not to let Hannah's voice replay in my head, trying not to let the doubts she planted bloom into conclusions. When Carson finally walked through the door, he looked exhausted in a way that had nothing to do with work. His shoulders were tense, his jaw tight. He set his keys down carefully, like he was afraid of making too much noise. I asked him where he'd been, and the pause before he answered felt endless. He told me he'd run into Hannah. She'd asked him to meet her, just to talk. She said she was worried about me again. She said things felt like they were spiraling, and she wanted to make sure he was prepared for what might happen next. She told him she didn't think I was emotionally stable enough for the pressure of a wedding. She said I was unraveling. Hearing my best friend describe me like that to the man I was supposed to marry felt like being erased. At one point, he asked me a question that shattered me. He asked if maybe we should slow things down. Not because he didn't love me, but because he didn't know how to breathe anymore. That's when I took the ring off. I didn't throw it. I didn't cry when I slid it off my finger. I placed it gently on the table between us, like something fragile and already broken. The silence that followed was unbearable. We stared at it like it was evidence of a crime we didn't know how to solve. That moment felt like failure. Like I'd let Hannah win. Like everything she'd whispered into existence had finally come true. I went to bed alone that night, my hand feeling strangely light without the ring, my chest heavy with a grief I didn't know how to process. By morning, the collapse was public. Hannah posted again. Another carefully worded message about difficult decisions and loving people through hard truths. This time, people assumed the worst without asking. Messages flooded in asking if the wedding was off, if we were okay, if Hannah had been right all along. I didn't respond to anyone. I sat on the floor of my bedroom, surrounded by screenshots, timestamps, messages Hannah didn't know I had. Every lie she'd told, every inconsistency, every moment she'd contradicted herself was laid out in front of me like a map. I saw it clearly now, not just what she'd done, but why. This wasn't jealousy over Carson. It was jealousy over control. Hannah believed the collapse was complete. She believed she'd successfully rewritten the story. She believed I was too broken, too embarrassed, too tired to fight back. She believed the silence meant surrender. She was wrong, because sitting there on my bedroom floor, with my engagement in ruins and my best friend exposed in my mind, I typed out a message. One message. Not long, not dramatic, just precise. A message that told the truth without raising my voice. A message that would reach exactly the right people. I stared at it for a long time before hitting send, knowing there was no going back once I did. Knowing that after this, nothing would be the same, and knowing she would never see it coming. I didn't write the message in anger. That was the first thing Hannah got wrong about me. She expected rage. She expected a messy confrontation, a public meltdown, something she could point to and say, "See, this is what I was worried about." I refused to give her that satisfaction. I wrote the message in silence. It went out to a small group first. Not everyone. Just the people who mattered. Carson, his sister, his mother, a few mutual friends who'd quietly pulled away, and Hannah. I kept it simple. I said I'd been quiet because I needed clarity, not because I had something to hide. I said I was sharing this not to attack anyone, but to correct the story that had been circulating without my consent. Then I attached the proof. Screenshots of Hannah's messages to me, warning me about Carson without evidence. Screenshots of her messages to Carson, questioning his commitment while claiming I encouraged the conversations. Timestamps that showed she'd told different people different versions of the same story. A screenshot of the night she claimed she saw Carson's name on someone else's phone, followed by proof that he'd been at home with me at that exact time. I didn't explain each piece. I didn't narrate it. I let the facts speak. I ended the message with one sentence. This is why my engagement fell apart. Then I put my phone down. Then the friends started reaching out. Some were embarrassed. Some were angry. Some were quiet but sincere. They admitted they'd believed Hannah because she sounded so convincing. Because she cried. Because she'd positioned herself as the protector. They told me they wished they'd asked me directly, instead of assuming the worst. Hannah went silent online. Her posts stopped. Her comments disappeared. The woman who'd spoken so publicly about truth and courage suddenly had nothing to say. I later found out she'd tried to spin it privately, claiming I was manipulative, claiming I'd taken things out of context. But the message had done what it needed to do. The story no longer belonged to her. The most important response came 2 days later. Carson showed up at my door holding the ring. He didn't propose again. He didn't make promises. He just told me he believed me. Fully. Without doubt. He said he needed to rebuild trust in the world again. Not just in us, but he wanted to do it with me, not without me. We didn't rush back into planning. We didn't announce anything. We took our time. We rebuilt quietly, intentionally, without an audience. The ring went back on my finger weeks later, not as a symbol of victory but of survival. As for Hannah, I never confronted her directly after the message. I didn't need to. She lost what she valued most: control, credibility, the ability to define herself as the hero of someone else's pain. The people who mattered saw her clearly, and the ones who didn't were never really mine to begin with. I blocked her number. I removed her from my life without ceremony. No goodbye. No final argument. Just absence. And in that absence, I found peace I hadn't felt in months. The message didn't destroy her life. It restored mine. That's the part she never expected. She thought silence meant weakness. She thought kindness meant compliance. She thought I would protect her image at the cost of my own truth. Instead, I chose clarity. And in doing so, I learned something I'll carry for the rest of my life. The people who try to ruin your happiest moments don't deserve an explanation. They deserve the truth. And sometimes, all it takes is one message to set it free.